WonderCon, and welcome to the Oops Science as Problem and Solution panel. And I am thrilled that you've joined us. My name is Ali Kokmen. I am by day a mild-mannered bookseller for a great metropolitan bookstore, which suits me just fine because I love books, and I love talking about books, and I love getting books into the hands of readers like you. But none of that would matter at all if there weren't talented writers writing books that we actually want to read that I get to actually sell to you. So we are incredibly lucky today to have with us a group of authors who have written a fantastic set of books that you're going to want to add to your to-read pile just as soon as you can. And we'll be talking a little bit about science. We'll be talking a lot about books, and we're going to have some fun. So I'd like to introduce our panelists now. I confess, I don't exactly know, those of you who are viewing this, exactly how the view is tiled. So I am just gonna start introducing people. Let's say, I don't know, reverse alphabetically by first name. So wave bigly when you hear your name. But first we have with us Sarah Gailey. Sarah came onto the speculative scene in 2015, becoming one of the funniest, sharpest voices in the online pop culture scene, going viral frequently for stories and their general joie de vivre. They've made regular contributions to multiple websites, including the Hugo-nominated Women of Harry Potter series for Tor.com, so you must check that out. Galey has also contributed nonfiction to outlets like Mashable and the Boston Globe, various short fiction in various popular venues, and of course, full-length novels, starting with their 2019 debut, Magic for Liars. Sarah Gailey. Also with us is Laura Lamb, originally from sunny California, but now living in cloudy Scotland. She's the author of the feminist space opera Seven Devils, co-written with Elizabeth May, the speculative thriller False Hearts and its companion novel Shattered Minds, and the award-winning Micah Gray series Pantomime, Shadow Play, and Masquerade. Her short fiction and essays have appeared in various anthologies, Nasty Women, Solaris Rising 3, Scotland in Space, and more. So with so many credits, you're probably thinking that she could teach you a thing about writing, and you would be right because she also lectures on creative writing at Edinburgh Napier University. Laura Lamb's with us. Next, we also have with us Jonathan Messinger, who is the co-founder and executive producer of Gen Z Media, a company devoted to producing high-quality podcasts for kids, including but not limited to his own creation, the Alien Adventures of Finn Caspian podcast. He was the founding editor of Time Out Chicago, editing its book section, then later the web editor for Time Out Chicago Kids. The Omaha World Herald named his book of stories Hiding Out one of the best books of the year, and New City has 5 times named him as one of the top 50 literary figures of Chicago, which makes sense, for that's where he lives, in the Windy City, with his wife and 2 sons. Jonathan Messinger has joined us. And next we have with us Eric Anthony Glover, who studied screenwriting at Sarah Lawrence College, and in 2016 was named a final draft Big Break Fellow, where he studied feature and television writing in Burbank. Glover is committed to writing about underrepresented groups and hopes to make the world a better place with his work, starting with his perhaps debut graphic novel, Black Star, that brings him here today. And his Black Star partner is Ariel Giovannos, a New York-based illustrator, writer, and comics artist. Her work has been featured in Eisner and Harvey-nominated anthology Fresh Romance, and in various magazines, comics, books, and branded social media campaigns. Recently, she drew a series of variant covers for the Buffy the Vampire Slayer spin-off series Giles, and was a featured cover artist for the Adventure Time comic series, and completed a residency with Redbubble in San Francisco. Ariel is with us here. And we have with us Andy Weir, a lifelong space nerd who built a 2-decade career as a software engineer until the success of his first published novel, The Martian, allowed him to live out his dream of writing full-time. He remains a devoted hobbyist of such subjects as relativistic physics, orbital mechanics, and the history of manned spaceflight. But what he really wants you to know is that he also misses a mean cocktail. Andy Weir is with us. Thanks so much. So welcome, panel. We are here to talk a little bit about science, a little bit about science fiction, which is great because you have written some fantastic novels. I would love to hear a little bit more about the book that brought you here today. So if you could tell us a little bit more about your books, your most recent book, and your approach to the science there, that would be swell. Let's start with Laura. Let's tell us about your book.
Right. So the book that I think got me here is Goldilocks, which came out right in the height of lockdown. And it's about 5 women who steal a spaceship to journey to an exosolar planet to save a dying Earth. And I usually pitch it as The Martian meets The Handmaid's Tale. So it's quite fun to be on a panel with Andy Weir. And yeah, lots of science, lots of making.
Sorry, Margaret Atwood's not here, but
I know that would have made
that would have been.
Panel goals for next time, absolutely. Jonathan, tell us about the alien adventures of Finn and Finn Caspian.
Yeah, so it's a series of books about 4 kids who travel around on a space station, and they visit different planets looking for a planet where humans could one day live. And there's a new one coming out next week, or beginning of March, I should say, called Finn Caspian and the Uncommon Cold. And it's all about a virus that spreads and everybody has to go into quarantine. That was written a couple years ago, and I'm sure everybody is still really interested in that subject.
I think you're onto something. This might be a topic people are interested in. Sarah, tell us about The Echo Wife.
I would be delighted to. The Echo Wife is my novel about clones, marriage, identity, and getting away with murder. It came out in the middle of February, and I approached the science by completely making up everything out of whole cloth and then doing enough research to make sure I wouldn't step into actual science and screw it up. And just today, I got sent a review from my publicist by an actual scientist who said that the science was hilarious.
To back of the book blurb for the paperback, certainly. Eric, tell us about Black Star, and Ariel, join in too, because you're part of this as well.
Yeah, please. Black Star is about a pretty helpless scientist who crash lands on a dangerous planet, and she has to race a ruthless wilderness expert to a shuttle only built for 1 occupant. So while the main character is battling elements, she has to stay a step ahead of her former crewmate, who's pretty much willing to kill her to get a spot on the shuttle. So very light fare, not violent at all. And a blast to do with Ariel. And please, Ariel, if you take it from here.
I mean, yeah, I think that Eric pretty much nailed it. It's very, very soft, gentle piece of literature. No fight scenes at all, none of that. It pretty fun cat and mouse story. Don't want to say much more without spoiling it. Yeah.
Sure. I will say that Ariel helped me think more about technology than I ever had going into the graphic novel, just with some of her mock-ups. This was originally an original screenplay of mine, and what she brought to the table in terms of just like initial designs made me think, I have to lean into that. I have to lean into the augmented reality glasses. I have to lean into X, Y, and Z. So she boosted things beyond my own expectations. I made a bunch of stuff up too, but she made it look really good. So thank you so much, Ariel.
Yeah, totally. It's very like when you're drawing it, it's like, is it scientifically accurate or does it look really cool? So as an artist, I'm very like, it looks really cool. So that's where I come in on this.
Fantastic, thank you. And Andy, what's new with you book-wise?
Well, my next book is called Project Hail Mary, and it comes out on May 4th, and it's all about accepting our Lord Jesus Christ. No, it's a story about an astronaut who, well, he's a guy. He wakes up on a spaceship with complete amnesia, and soon finds out it's his job to save the entire planet Earth in a desperate space mission called Hail Mary, because it's a desperate long shot attempt. And yeah, I don't want to give away too much in spoilers, but it's still along my usual lines of I try to stay as close to real science as possible. People think that means I'm like really smart, but it just means I'm really lazy to make up new science for fictional, like, stuff. I want to just, real science is very well documented, and I don't have to make stuff up for that. So yeah, so that's why I'm here.
Fantastic, thank you. I can hear the clicks on the pre-order buttons happening as we speak. So some of you have touched on this, but the thing about science is it's a real thing. You can actually look it up. You can study it, you can research it, or you could kind of choose not to. So I'm curious to hear a little bit more about y'all's approach to research and the kind of research you do or don't do or not do. Laura, I know from the acknowledgments in your book, which were a chapter or two unto itself, that you probably have a particular view of research in the.
Yeah, I just have it open because I'm like, I forgot who I thanked in it. It's 5 pages long. But Goldilocks, I kind of got brave enough to write it because I was involved with this cool academic project called Social Dimensions of Outer Space, where they partnered us with but like artists and writers and social scientists and hard scientists to come up with ideas for stories. So I wrote about the Fringe Festival in space for that, and I got partnered with an astrophysicist. And I really enjoyed that process of like them explaining the science to me in little chunks that I could understand. And so it made me brave enough to be like, let me try and write something in space. And I found out that I am not terribly clever, but I'm very good at asking clever people questions. And I've noticed that very clever people really love to geek out about what their interests are. So I was able to talk to like the former head of the Johnson Space Center at NASA, a doctor who looks at like the effects of microgravity on the human body. One of my good friends, Sinead, like runs a lab where she does experiments on evolution and algae and climate change. And she looked at all the algae stuff for me. So I got to just learn lots of really cool stuff and hope that I translated it in a way that didn't completely butcher it. But it was fun.
Fantastic. Who else has a research story or point of view? Sarah, please.
So as I mentioned earlier, I did not base the science in my book on real science. I based all the physiological processes are pretty real and based on things that human bodies really do, because that's pretty fixed. But the entire science of cloning, I made up from pretty whole cloth, because I have a much older sister who is a scientist, and I grew up hearing her talking trash about
much older sister. I like that. Yeah. She wants you to know her sister is like much older.
She's gonna be pretty mad when she sees this. No, from when I was a very tiny child, I was just hearing her say like, that's not how any of that works. And so I was like, let's not get that rap. But I did get to talk to a lot of laboratory and research scientists about relationships in a lab environment. And so most of my research, instead of saying, what is your work and how does it happen, I just got to say, what irritates you about the people you work with in the lab? And I got so much information. They truly love talking about that subject.
Scientists gossip about coworkers too. They're just like us. That's fantastic. good luck at the next Thanksgiving when you and your sister are together. Jonathan, you're also writing for younger readers too. Do you have a different approach when you're talking about learning and talking about some of these scientific topics for that audience?
Yeah, so basically my approach is that like the basic fundamental principles of physics and things like that are all sound, so like there are moments where things have to be explained, but other than that, it's really sort of imaginative in a lot of ways. And because I've been doing a podcast for a few years, it's very interactive with the audience. I get emails probably 3 to 4 times a week from a kid telling me what an idiot I am and that I don't understand space travel. And I got one from like a 12-year-old that was like, the subject was, do you know how gravity works? And turned out I didn't. So I try to have as much fun with all that stuff as I can, but make sure that the basic stuff like gravity is correct.
At the beginning of Project Hail Mary, that was all about refiguring out how gravity works as your character figures out where he is.
Yeah, he realizes that he's in he spends some time in like 1.5 G's, and then he's in 0 G, and then he's in 1 G, but it's a centrifuge, so there's a gradient, like the gravity is a little less at his head than it is at his feet, and other way around. Nope. Stick to my original thing. Anyway, yeah. But since I'm rambling anyway, I'll talk about how I kind of approach science. It's funny, I've somehow bungled into a niche where I'm the guy who writes realistic science fiction. But as a consumer, as a reader, I don't need that. I love reading just completely speculative, made up science. I've got no problem with like a warp drive or whatever else you want to put in there. My only sticking point is it has to be internally consistent. If you establish a rule for how your MacGuffin works, it has to be consistently working that way. And so, so for instance, I've got no problem with warp drive in Star Trek, but there's one episode of Classic Trek where they need to go from Mercury to Earth, and it's taking them a while. And I'm like, okay, like Mercury and Earth are like 7 light minutes apart, and you can go many, many times the speed of light. So this should really not be a problem for you. So it's that sort of stuff.
And you can't turn your warp drive on within the solar system. You'll destroy something.
They turn their warp drive. I appreciate you playing along, but they activate warp drives all the time in solar systems. You just have to be a certain distance away from any sort of gravimetric or tachyon field. Try to keep them. So, but anyway, so it's like Sarah was saying, they make up all sorts of science of their own, but it's okay as long as that science is internally consistent. And that's me pontificating. I mean, other people can enjoy whatever they like, but that's kind of my take. I mean, one of my favorite sci-fi properties is Doctor Who, and that barely even touches reality with its science. So
that's true. And so, Eric, Arielle, I think you must have a unique approach to this, because some of this is some of the needs of your story are coming from the story itself. But as I heard, Arielle draws a bunch of cool stuff that you need to lean into. How does collaboration affect this?
Man, what a boon Ariel's been the entire time. When I wrote the screenplay, I did a very not visual thing, and bless Ariel for making it better. I had the main character have a tablet on her forearm that she would just type into. That's how she commanded this device that was supposed to help her. Just typing the whole movie. It's something I'm probably going to have to revise. But Ariel came to me with the idea of just having her kind of Google Glass features on this visor she was wearing, kind of show options in front of her face that she could like just point around and click around in the air about. So it made things instantly more dynamic, and I leaned into that kind of thing 100% more once the idea was presented to me about my own story, which is humbling, but also just exhilarating because it meant new storytelling possibilities. And honestly, the book didn't challenge me that much to go deep into like finding out like what I could about like the hard science, because perhaps I was making it easy on myself, but it takes place in a time where Earth is in a bit of disrepair. Technologically, it hasn't made that many advancements. So the technology that you see is probably all based on stuff that we already know about. The tablet is pretty much functioning as Siri. You know, there's like a bodysuit that the main character wears that's trackable by someone else. Just, you know, find my iPhone essentially. So I just did the equivalent of seeing technology that worked for the drama and just took it from there. And I think the rest is up to, you know, suspension of disbelief on the reader's part.
Fantastic. Ariel, would you agree?
Oh yeah, I think when I was first given the screenplay, I did notice that there was a lot of typing, which is, you know, I think that makes sense for when you're reading something text-based. But sort of when you're dealing with a comic, I really love to kind of look into visual storytelling solutions and how you are able to dramatize something. So something like, once you're given kind of like the mechanism, like the visual storytelling language of screens in front of her, you can then sort of use that to be like, okay, like maybe a large looming screen in front of her means something different than like a smaller screen. Like how can you use that to sort of elevate or dramatize the emotions that she's dealing with? And I think that was more the focus for me, rather than thinking, is something technologically accurate. I love like a storytelling motif, like a visual motif. So that was my thing, really. And yeah, I would say that Eric did make it pretty easy on me. And I was given sort of like the descriptions of like all the stuff that I needed to kind of make designs for in advance, just so that I could start thinking about it. And I believe like in one of the descriptions, he was like, oh, it's kind of like a rundown ship where it's made out of other parts of other stuff. So I was like, okay, cool. So I don't need to go like super sleek. This can just be like, it could kind of look just like a ship cabin, like a regular ship cabin, because it's not, we're trying to say, yes, it's the future, but it's not the Jetsons, you know what I mean? And that was like a pretty grounded direction for me to work with. It was really great. Yeah.
It's fascinating. I think
Just want to jump in. Sorry, real quick. I had a very similar situation where like Eric, I write as a writer and I'm kind of visualizing things. Maybe I don't know what it's like for you, Eric, but for me, I don't get a super visual image in my mind of the events going on. It's just sort of concepts and blobs, right? And so like, you know, when so wrote the adaptation of The Martian for you know, he wrote the screenplay, and he's like, so Andy, your entire book is a guy typing into his log. We're gonna have to do something different. and he did. Some of it was just direct narrative. Others was he came up with the idea of like, oh, it's a NASA mission, so there's cameras everywhere, and he just talks to the cameras. But yeah, so I had that exact same thing, Eric, that you did, which is I wrote a story that, hey, this works from a wordsmithing medium. When you're absorbing the story via words, it works great. But once you start to try to get visual with it, it's crap. So it needs to change. And so, yeah, you learn a lot when your story gets turned into a visual medium.
Moving from medium to medium, it sounds like something, Jonathan, you've worked through, from an audio point of view into words rather than words into pictures.
Yeah, that's right. And So, I mean, for the most part, the stories don't unfold that differently. They just don't have cool sound effects and voices and music and things like that. So I can't. I have to throw away all my crutches that I use on the podcast and just write stories. But you know, for me, writing for kids, the big thing is always it's sort of similar to what you guys are talking about. But I always read it aloud to see if it's like making sense, if the rhythm is there, if like I I have two kids and I have what I call the Lego test, where if I'm reading them the story and they stop and start picking up Legos as I'm telling them the story, then I know that I've bored them, and I fail that test constantly. So that's been super helpful for me. It's just having that kind of test audience there all the time.
That's interesting. So for the rest of you, do you have an audience in mind when you're writing, or now that your works are completed, do you have an ideal audience, an ideal reader in your head that that you wish will pick up your book? Laura, what do you think?
I think yes, but like every reader is so different that it usually ends up just morphing into like me writing for a version of myself who I think would be delighted by this book because I know myself the best. So if I'm writing YA, I'm writing to my 16-year-old self. If I'm writing adult, I'm writing to my adult self. And I think too, like, I guess my reader will shift a bit in terms of how much science they are expecting, because Goldilocks is going kind of more in attempting to at least base things in science fiction or science fact. But then I also released Seven Devils last year, which has like laser bullets on page 1 and is basically like a Star Wars riff off, playing with all those tropes, which was super fun. But there is absolutely very little attempt at explaining the science in that, which was a nice, like, refreshing change after pulling out all of my hair trying to learn all the science for Goldilocks.
Sarah, what about you? How do you envision your audience?
I mean, before I answer that, I just want to say, like, laser bullets, I'm listening.
Yeah.
I would love to hear a little more. I'm gonna be really bitter at Laura for giving the exact answer that I would wanted to give, but doing it better than I can. I'm always writing for a past version of myself. I mean, also I'm writing for every single reader, like, please just, everyone buy my books. But when I'm drafting, I'm always writing something that I wish a past version of me could have read, in hopes that someone who's going through stuff that I've been through in my life will pick up the book and see themselves and maybe see answers or questions that they need, that'll help them get through things a little more gracefully than I have.
Well said. Andy, do you have a point of view on this?
It's exactly the same, and I'm actually relieved to see so many other writers are doing the same thing. I try to write a book that I myself would like to read, although I guess I'm not advanced enough to write for past versions of myself. I'm just writing for me now. I'm also never putting any effort into helping people through problems. I just want to entertain people. I do have one philosophy that I follow, though, which is, I write kind of thrillers, I guess. And so what I try to do is I imagine, all right, it's 1 a.m. The person reading my book is starting to get tired and they're reading my book and stuff. And at some point they say, like, okay, it's time for me to go to sleep. And they put the book down, they go to sleep. When is it that they do that? What paragraph are they on when they do that? Why are they allowed to do that? Like, why are they not, okay, wait, no, I got to find out what happens next, So anytime, like, literally for every paragraph when I'm writing it, I'm like, is this where they put the book down for the night? If so, does this paragraph need to be here? Can I get this, is it exposition? Can I sneak it in some other way? Keep those bastards up all night. That's just that's kind of my philosophy. And as for, I hate to sound like such a jerk, but I'm not trying to help anyone. I just want to entertain people. Also, my stories don't have any social moral or meaning. They're just pure entertainment is all I'm going for. So, yeah, that's that's it.
So you're a villain who's trying to induce book hangovers in all of us.
Yes. I want you slogging around the next day, mainlining coffee because you could not put my book down and go to sleep. That's my goal. And when people tell me, oh, I stayed up really late, I'm like, yes. And so that makes me happy. I want to write a book. And that's because of, frankly, my own immaturity as a reader. I get bored really quickly reading books. If it starts to go off into some long expositional thing, I'm like,
You're reaching for the Legos.
I'm reaching for the Legos. I'm all about the Legos. And oftentimes people say, they say, oh, Andy, tell me how to write a book, as if I could just like explain that to you in a quick 5-minute conversation. But one bit of advice I always give is like, don't start your novel with a description of a mountain range. Like, get right into the story, make things happen,
That sounds oddly specific.
It's because it's something I've done in the past and I realized it was really boring.
My book I started when I was 15 started with "The sunset was as red as blood."
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, 15.
Very nice. I once, in one of my books, I once described a fence as being made out of pure titanium alloy. So alloy means multiple different materials. I also think I once talked about pedestrians on bicycles. Another shining moment of mine in a rough draft.
Andy, I do actually have like a 30-second explanation for how to write a book that I give people, because they ask me that question all the time too. So here's how you do it. You know the alphabet? You take that and you mix it all up, all kinds of crazy ways. And then you do that like 90,000 times in a row. And there you go.
There's a book. Don't forget spaces.
See, this is why you're so successful.
Yeah, right. See, my books have spaces. The rest of you haven't worked that out yet, but you'll get there. Yeah.
It's all double dashes and semicolons for everyone. Yeah, I love that. I've heard the same thing, only with an unabridged dictionary. Here's an unabridged dictionary. Just reorder the words and you'll be fine. Just giving people the 26 letters, that's hardcore.
Yeah, that's next level difficulty.
That's fantastic. So we've talked a bit about research. We've talked a little bit about audience and readers. And I think we've touched on this a little bit. So let's, which is that horrible word that people like talking about, which is realism. And I get the sense that despite the fact that we're working with science and scientific themes, we don't have how much does realism matter? What does realism mean in the context of a good science fiction, or does it? Eric's nodding. He's got a sage thought. That's
my sage thought is, I just want these two characters to fight. How do I get that to happen? So I would put them in situations that I suppose could be described as realistic. There's blood, I suppose, but I didn't give any consideration beyond that. The two main characters in my book happen to be on an Earth-like planet. All the environments are all jumbled up, and an icy mountain range is very close to a desert, which is very close to a jungle, which makes the planet strange. But otherwise, they're dealing with the same gravity, the same amount of oxygen, same amount of sunlight for the most part. So it was more just about creating a canvas where these two people could respond to each other emotionally, rather than responding too much to the environment, which was, it could have been like a wackadoo environment. I could have had North, the main character, fighting columns of lava that were like doing loop-de-loops around her. But I just wanted her fear and her focus to be aimed at the antagonist who was chasing her towards the ship. That was the one simple rule that I tried to keep throughout the whole thing. So I guess in a sense, I did try to keep it grounded or realistic, because I didn't want too much of the focus taken away from the inherent drama that was brewing between these two people.
So true. I think it is never wrong to have a focus on character, which I think is what you're describing. Would you, anyone else? Would you have would you agree, disagree about that?
I mean, to my mind, the emotions are the things that need to be real. Everything else, I don't turn to science fiction because I'm like, oh man, I want to know what real life is like. You know what I mean? Like I'm looking for something else. So yeah, I think that I think that what Eric said was right on.
Fantastic. So one of the it occurs to me that we haven't really talked a little bit talked about the core question in the panel title, which was science problems and solutions. But that's okay, because I'm not sure that there's a good answer. But when you think about your works, when you think about your characters, is it and you think about the science that informs your stories? Are you one who comes to this thinking of, I'm using science as a problem to be overcome, or one that's a part of the solution that we get to play with, that we get to discover? Andy's nodding, so what do we think?
¿Por qué no los dos? I mean, I like science to be the problem and the solution. And yeah, and of course, I mean, this is just my particular niche. For those of you who are wondering why I went off into the ether, I just had an internet chug, so I missed the last like 2 minutes or so of conversation. But I assume you were all just talking about how awesome I am, so we'll skip past that. And now we'll, you were talking about how important is accuracy and authenticity, and like I said before, for me, I like the science to be accurate because that's the particular flavor of sci-fi I write, but I don't think it's required at all to be enjoyable. But in the way that I particularly write, I like to be as accurate to science as possible. I'm a professional writer. Words are my gift. And what's really cool is when I start going down the rabbit hole researching something, I'm like, okay, how do you grow potatoes? And then next thing I know, I'm all the way down there. Okay, this is what the pH of the soil has to be. I start finding problems that I never would have imagined on my own. And so, like for instance, in the Martian, I'm like, okay, he's going to grow potatoes, no problem. He's got water, he's got da. But it turns out there's a minimum water content necessary in the soil in order for the potato plants to survive. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, he's going to have a lot of that. Well, a mission wouldn't bring that much water. Okay, so now I need to have him make water. And that led to a whole subplot that I never would have thought of otherwise. So for me, it serves me really well to just go stupidly far down the rabbit hole researching things until I find a plot complication out of it, and then back out and then have the main character solve it. But that's just my particular brand. Once again, it's an awesome, I feel like I'm cheating in that I'm lazy. I'm like, I don't have to write stuff. I just have to just let physics tell me where things would go bad for the main character and work from there.
Some folks say you should put your characters up a tree, but if physics does it for you, that's even easier. Fantastic. Anyone else have a thought about character and science as problem or solution? Sarah, I think your characters, they got themselves a problem.
I mean, it's so funny because the Echo Wife is about cloning, and in the like book launch kind of extravaganza of conversations about it, everyone keeps asking me, so do you think that ethically cloning is good or bad? And I'm like, please, I'm not equipped to answer this question. They keep on asking me that, and like, do people actually have free will? And I'm like, I can't actually answer this. In my writing, I like to use science, just like Andy said, as plot problem. It serves as a thing that brings issues up that then we try to use more science to solve. And I often try to use that in the way that human beings really like to, where we're like, don't worry, nature will fix you with science and human endeavors. And it goes horribly awry, and then people wind up, mangled corpses. But in terms of like real world, I think it's so complex that we keep on just throwing the problem and the solution all into the same blender and saying, science will make this work out for us just fine. Nothing to worry about. We can do it.
We need books too. I think we are coming up on our time, but before we get there, I absolutely have to ask this question. which is this. So we've talked a lot about science, and all of your works touch on different branches of science. So I'm really curious. I don't want to say what's your favorite branch of science, but I'm curious as to say what kind of science would you like to be more expert in an ideal world? What would you like to know more about science-wise? You know, me, I would love to be a better statistician. That counts, right? Jonathan, what do you think?
What percentage of people want to be better statisticians?
Well, we're going to.
Why don't you work on that?
1 out of thing, and then we'll do a 2-tailed test to see if that answer is right, and then yeah.
Well, yeah, we know it's 1 out of 8
Yeah,
at least. I don't know. I mean, I could be better at all science, but I guess like I'd like to know what a quark is and like theoretical physics and things like that. Like that'd be pretty cool.
Cool.
I think
Laura?
he's a Ferengi.
I understood that reference.
You out.
I think I'd like to be better at climate change science because I had to study a lot of that because Earth is not in a great place in Goldilocks, which was quite alarming to do all of the research and realize how in trouble we are and just kind of keep pretending we're not. So I've decided to get better at that science. So I partnered with my friend Sinead, who's the algae expert, and we started a YouTube channel, which I'm going to shamelessly plug, and it's called Cyotopia, CYOtopia, and it's Choose Your Own Topia, and we're using climate change science to create 2 different versions of Net Zero 2050, but all roads are not equal. One's more equitable and one's less equitable, and we called them carrot and stick. You can guess which is which because it amused us. But we're looking at all these different facets of climate change science and learning a lot about it, and it's really cool. There's also art.
Is that Cyotopia with a C because of cyanobacteria?
Yeah, yep.
Yep.
Nice.
Nice.
Fantastic. Here I'm asking, how do you want to be smarter? You're already making the rest of us smarter, so thank you. Andy, what of your many sciencey hobbies, what is the one branch that you'd like to be more expert in even?
Quantum physics. And because I have put an enormous amount of effort into trying to understand it, and I've just never really gotten there. Like I get some of it. Well, my goal, my holy grail would be to find a way. I understand a lot about it, but would be to find a way to put it into terms that the layman can understand. And if I could do that, that would be awesome. And so like one thing I'm part of the way there saying like, the first thing you need to understand when you're talking about quantum physics and quantum mechanics is ignore everything you think you know about physics and don't think of this as being the physical rules of the universe you live in. Instead, I'm describing to you the rules of a board game. Okay, because nobody asks questions about rules of a board game. You say, okay, in Monopoly, you roll the dice and you advance a certain number of spaces. Oh, well, why don't I advance like 3.5 spaces? Nobody ever asks that. Everybody understands you land on quantized spaces. Anyway, that's a start. So I would like to understand quantum physics well enough to describe it to people such that they can understand it without having multiple PhDs. And I don't even understand it well enough. And so it pisses me off because, sorry, it angers me. I'm not supposed to swear because like usually I can wrap my head around most sciences pretty easily, but quantum mechanics is just beating me. So that's what I wish I could get.
It's the Taoism of science. You can understand it or you could explain it, but not both. Arielle, what would you like to know more about?
I'm going to go in a different direction and say I think I'm more interested in sort of like the social sciences, and I'm actually interested like currently about like how is the internet affecting the human brain and the attention span and things like that, or how is like influencer or this massive level of being known or being a celebrity, how does that affect people's brains? Like what is BTS thinking? Like, You know what I mean? Like how does that level of being known on the planet affect a person? You know what I mean? Yeah, I don't know. I just think that's a very interesting question. And as we get more and more like reliant on technology, how is that sort of changing patterns of thinking that we have? So that's what's been on my mind lately.
Fantastic. Eric, what about you?
I'm in the same boat. I would really like to understand more about what makes people more empathetic versus less. I've grown pretty concerned over the past every year ever about how people vote and why. And I don't quite understand folks who disagree with me. Surprise. I would really like to see what it would take to genuinely change hearts and minds and see what it takes to overcome tribalism. I'm a little astounded by how wealth seems to impede any sense of extending empathy. I'd love to get a sheet around that. It would be really brilliant to just find a way to relate to people through science rather than whatever I'm equipped with, which doesn't always work when I'm trying to convince people of my point. So yeah, science of people is what's really fascinating me right now. I'm with Ariel.
People are endlessly fascinating. You'll well there. Sarah, what about you?
I mean, I'm into neuropsychology, neurobiology, and all the science of the brain. We know less about the brain than we do about the deep ocean or outer space. And it's like a completely unfathomable mess, mine most of all. I'm super fascinated by it because it intersects with every other kind of science we encounter. Our brains understand things at rates that we can't always explain. Our brains process the world in a way that makes us more or less open to new ideas and new points of view. And trauma and epigenetics shape that so much. It just fascinates the heck out of me. And I think it's probably my own brain being like, I'm so interesting, pay attention to me. But I don't have any choice but to listen to it because that's exactly where I live.
I just want to interject, Sarah. A very good friend of mine is named Dr. Brendan Allison. He's a cognitive scientist and he studies the brain all the time. And he's always saying, you think that we know a lot about the human brain, but we don't. It's incredibly primitive, our understanding of the brain right now. And he has this great analogy he uses. He says, the way we study brains right now is like, booting up your computer. Imagine if we didn't understand anything about how a computer worked and you're trying to reverse engineer the source code to Windows by watching the hard drive light. Whether it's on or off and when and why and what happens that makes it blink a lot. And that's about the level we're at in understanding the human brain. It's incredibly rudimentary. So I just think that's interesting.
It's so wild. I mean, part of how we study the brain is we take the little hat off of it that it wears and we poke it and see what happens. We don't do that with so many other branches of science. And my favorite, like year one, like first semester psychology major is the blue that you see, the same blue that I see thing is like, didn't the brain name itself? Did it just tell us what it's called? And then you start thinking about that. And I don't know if this is the same for you guys, but my brain goes, that's too advanced for you. Get out of here.
Like, nope, that's enough thinking.
That is fantastic. Well, I think we are at our time for our panel. I guess I'm not sure that we solved the question of whether science is a problem or solution, but I do think that we've identified a bunch of great books that'll help you get through the day while you're contemplating that. So I want to thank Sarah and Laura and Jonathan and Eric and Arielle and Andy for being with us. I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank our Maven Mary Elizabeth from Creative Conversations for making this all possible. I want to thank WonderCon, and of course, all you who are watching. I want to make sure whatever you do, please, whatever you do, read a book. Thank you very much.